The Seventh Family was the judicial, law enforcement, and political arm of the outfit. Without their corrupting influence, the outfit's rackets could not have flourished over the decades. The most high-profile mob turncoat in the 1980s was Tokyo Joe Cano. Ito was a unique figure in the outfit. He was actually the only outfit associate doing business with black street gangs in Chicago. In 1949, Ito moved to Chicago and set up an illegal gambling racket known as Balada. Balada is a type of lottery which was popular in the low-income communities. Ito took in $200,000 a week and paid $3,000 a week out in payoffs to corrupt Chicago cops. Ito wasn't a made man. He ranked as high as you could get in the outfit as an associate earner. In the early 1980s, Ito's gambling operation was busted, and in 1983 he was convicted. On February 10th, weeks before he was to be sentenced, Ito was called to a meeting by Northside outfit capo Vincent Solano. Ito was a bit apprehensive about the meeting and feared he was going to be killed. So that evening he put on his best suit and told his wife where his life insurance policy was before heading out to the meeting. While he was sitting in a parked car outside the meeting place with hitmen Jasper Campisi and John Gattuso, a Cook County deputy sheriff, opened fire from the back seat, pumping 3 shots into Ito's head. The bullets did not penetrate and only grazed his skull. After regaining consciousness, he dragged himself into a local pharmacy and called 911. The hitters screwed up the hit because they hand-loaded their own ammunition and did not pack the right amount of gunpowder in the bullet shells, and this made them ineffective. This shook Ito to his core and pushed him into the arms of the feds, and he immediately entered the witness protection program. Outfit criminal chief of detectives William Hanhart said Gattuso and Campisi were arrested at their homes and charged, and then released on $50,000 bond. About 5 months after the failed hit, the bodies of Ito's shooters, Gattuso and Campisi, were found in the trunk of a car in suburban Naperville. They had been beaten, strangled, and stabbed because they failed to kill Ito. And that's the way it was in the outfit. Miss and you die. According to the feds, while Gattuso and Campisi were in police custody, they approached them and offered to place them in a witness protection program if they testified against the shot caller, Capo Vincent Solano. Both said no and did not feel they were in any danger. The Ito hit came 3 weeks after the high-profile murder of outfit banker Alan Dorfman. Ken Ito successfully testified in court against his former outfit associates and partners and helped put away 15 outfit gangsters, including several corrupt cops. Years later, Ito would make a hooded appearance before the U.S. Senate. He testified about organized crime in Chicago. It was clear Solano was concerned that Ito would talk, so he decided to kill Ito and then take over his operation. But after Ito testified, many went to prison, leaving the Balada operation dead in the trunk, just like Gattuso and Campisi. Ito testified against many, but it never resulted in getting the shot caller, Capo Vincent Solano. Solano was never brought to justice and died a decade later, a free man, at his Lisle home. Tokyo Joe Cano ratted out people that had nothing to do with the attempt on his life. I'm sure this is not the result he or the feds wanted, but that's just the way it ended. In the 1980s, 2 key government informants emerged, and by the mid-1990s, the outfit's political, judicial, and law enforcement dominoes started to fall. This all started in 1982 when Willow Springs Police Chief Michael Corbett got involved in covering up the murder of Diane Masters. She was the wife of outfit attorney Alan Masters, and she was well known in the community. And she suddenly disappeared the day before she was to file for divorce. And 9 months after her disappearance, her body was found inside the trunk of her Cadillac at the bottom of the Chicago Sanitary Canal. Her head was crushed and 222 caliber bullets were found in her skull. The shell casings were also found in the trunk. She was beaten to death by her husband Alan Masters with a golf club. After the murder, Masters called Corbett and he showed up with another man. Most likely, it was Lieutenant Tim Keating. They rolled her up in a carpet and put her in the trunk and then shot her in the head and then dumped the car into the canal. They wanted to make it look like a mob hit. She was found after a cop patrolling found fresh tire tracks leading into the water, and a dive team was called in by the new chief of police of Willow Springs. The dive team found 82 cars stacked on top of each other in the underwater parking lot. Many of the cars in the canal were insurance jobs. For months, barges cruising the canal were complaining about bottoming out around the Route 83 bridge. The complaints were ignored. The third car pulled out of the canal was Diane Masters' Cadillac, and in the trunk was Diane Masters. Mike Corbett was the Chicago outfit's hand-picked police chief in Willow Springs. It was a very corrupt Chicago suburb where whorehouses and casinos operated with impunity. Under Cook County Sheriff Lieutenant Tim Keatings and Willow Springs Police Chief Michael Corbett's protection. The Willow Springs area was also used to dump many things, including bodies. In his early days, Corbett was an associate of Tony Accardo, Sam Giancana, and Capo Sal Bastone. And Corbett was directly connected to Tony Spilatro and Victor Spilatro. It was Victor Spilatro that ran things in Willow Springs for the outfit's Cook County operations. Masters had fixed many cases for the outfit, and both were indicted in the corruption case in a separate investigation. Along with the brothers, 50 were indicted. A dozen Cook County sheriffs and several Willow Springs cops were all convicted of extortion, prostitution, bribery, and racketeering. This was the end of the outfit's Willow Springs operators. Around the time of Diane's murder, Alan Masters was under the gun with the Greylord investigation and another federal investigation. 6 long years after Diane Masters' murder, justice was served. In 1989, the Willow Springs arm of the outfit was severed. Alan Masters received a 40-year sentence in connection with his wife's murder, and the 2 dirty cops were found guilty of soliciting murder. Cook County Sheriff's Lieutenant Tim Keating received 30 years, and Chief Michael Corbett received a 20-year sentence. In 1986, while Corbett was serving his time in the Chicago Metropolitan Correctional Center, he learned that the outfit had put a hit out on him and one of his sons. And Corbett claims this is the reason why he became an informant for the FBI. And his testimony and cooperation moved the feds a bit closer to the 7th family. Around the same time Corbett was running his mouth to the feds in prison about the outfit, Christmas came early for the feds when ex-cop, outfit attorney, and fixer Bob Cooley strolled into the feds' organized crime strike force office and said, "I've decided to cooperate." The feds immediately wired Cooley up and Operation Gambit started, and the feds worked towards developing criminal cases against mobsters and corrupt politicians in the First Ward. The First Ward was the most powerful ward in the city, and the ward was home to Richard J. Daley and Richard M. Daley. Operation Gambit is short for gambling attorney. These two informants were linked to outfit political powerhouses here in Chicago. Cooley was their bagman that bribed judges to fix cases. He was a corrupter of the system, and he did this for 4 outfit political heavyweights: Pat Marcy, Democrat Committeeman John DiArco Jr., John DiArco Sr., and First Ward Alderman Freddie Rhodey. They were all involved up to their necks, including crooked judges and dirty cops. The feds found out through Cooley that First Ward political leaders held court at Counselor's Row restaurant in Booth 1, where the outfit politicians did business. The group was nicknamed the Literary Club. The restaurant was directly across the street from City Hall, so the feds decided to bug the booth and set up a video camera across from the table. And for a month, tape rolled until the bug wire was discovered by a busboy. And then it was removed by the feds, and the politicians that did business at the table acted like it was no big deal. But little did they know, the feds also had months of recordings by Cooley. And when all of the tapes were combined, they sunk the outfit's political crew. In 1989, the feds finally closed the investigation. And overnight, Cooley just disappeared. And news about his deception leaked out. And panic shot through the political echelons of the outfit and Chicago's Democrat Party. There were no mob killings for 8 years after Cooley started talking. It was reported by the FBI the outfit put $1 million contract on Cooley's head, and the panic was warranted. And then the U.S. Attorney General announced the first wave of Gambit indictments. And now no one could deny that the outfit's corrupt influence on Chicago's leading politicians existed. John DiArco Jr., David Shields, Pasquale DeLeo, and Fred Rhodey were all convicted on corruption, racketeering, conspiracy, bribery, and extortion charges. Operation Gambit led to 9 federal trials throughout the 1990s. Some of the 24 pled guilty, and others were found guilty. And down the road, old guard gangsters like underboss Marco the Mover D'Amico were also indicted because of rat lawyer Bob Cooley. Cooley ran tape on D'Amico, and he was convicted in the sweeping racketeering case and received 12 years in prison. Exposed during the Gambit trials was the most corrupt judge on the bench, Cook County Judge Thomas J. Maloney. He was linked to a string of outfit gangsters and their associates. He was indicted in 1991, and in 1993 was convicted of fixing 3 state murder cases, and he was sentenced to 15 years. And after he served his sentence, Maloney died a free man in 2008. And during the other federal operation, Greylord, 17 judges, 48 lawyers, 8 policemen, 10 deputy sheriffs, 8 court officials, and 1 state legislator. Nearly all were convicted. Most of them pled guilty. These 2 investigations wiped out the outfit's stranglehold on Chicago. During the trial, a U.S. court judge said, "Democracy in Chicago was the same as any other banana republic or corrupt regime." Fred Rhodey was by far the highest-ranking made outfit member to ever hold political office in Chicago. Rhodey's father, Bruno Rhodey Sr., was known as Bruno the Bomber. He was a soldier in the Capone mob. Over his outfit career, he was arrested and was suspected in 2 murder investigations. And Bruno the Bomber was the first capo of what became the 26th Street Chinatown crew. He owned a grocery store on 21st and Wentworth. His store was 6 blocks away from Capone's Lexington Hotel headquarters. Alderman Fred Rhodey was convicted on 11 counts. He got lucky and was acquitted of the most serious allegation, fixing a Chinatown murder trial in 1981. Rhodey was sentenced to 4 years, but only served 3 years. He spent 30 years in office. He was a state senator for 6 years and an alderman for 24 years. Rhodey was instrumental in appointing William Hanhart as chief of detectives of the Chicago Police Department. Hanhart was the Chicago outfit's biggest plant in the department. He had access to all records and ongoing investigations and kept the outfit informed. Hanhart was convicted in 2001 of masterminding a multi-million-dollar jewelry theft ring and was convicted and served 10 years in prison. Rhodey and Marcy were selling city jobs and placing mobsters and associates from Angelo LaPetria's Chinatown crew at the Chicago Streets and Sanitation Department and the Water Department. And these guys ran gambling operations out of the departments and robbed them blind. They stole fuel, oil, batteries, tires, damn near everything that wasn't nailed down. Fred Rhodey was nicknamed Peanuts because of his size and called Freddie by his friends. Rhodey is the brother-in-law of second Chinatown capo, Frank Skid Caruso. Fred Rhodey died of cancer on September 20th, 1999. Pat Marcy's real name was Pasqualino Marciano. He was the real power broker and the secretary of the First Ward. Marciano was a gunman for the Capone gang. Just before he became the head of Chicago's old First Ward, he changed his name to Pat Marcy. During this time, Marcy controlled everything from the governor on down for the outfit. Pat Marcy handpicked guys like Fred Rhodey, John DiArco Jr., John DiArco Sr., to sit in the seats of power while he and Tony Accardo and other capos pulled their strings. And there was nothing they could not get done. The biggest surprise in Operation Gambit was the suicide of retired Judge Frank Wilson. He shot himself to death at his Arizona retirement home in February of 1990. Robert Cooley testified that before notorious hitman Harry the Hook Ailman's trial started, he was approached by Pat Marcy and asked to take over as Ailman's lawyer. Cooley argued that he could easily win an acquittal by discrediting the witnesses during cross-examination, but Marcy insisted that the outfit bosses preferred a bench trial with a judge who could be bribed to acquit. Marcy made it clear to Cooley that if he accepted the job and failed to deliver, the outfit would murder him. He immediately thought of his close friend, Cook County Circuit Judge Frank J. Wilson. Cooley said he knew a judge who no one would ever suspect. So he approached Judge Wilson and offered him $10,000 to acquit Harry Ailman. Wilson agreed, but later requested more money to compensate for the risk. As a result, Ailman was acquitted in a bench trial. And this was the cost: $10,000 to let a murderer go, to murder again in Chicago. In 1990, Harry Ailman was re-indicted for the 1972 Logan murder that he was acquitted for. Harry the Hook Ailman fatally shot Teamsters official William Logan in his Chicago neighborhood. The reason for Logan's murder was he was obstructing Ailman's Wild Bunch crew from hijacking his union members' trucks. When they went to retry Ailman, they had him, and they weren't going to let the mass killer go this time, and they threw the book at him. He was convicted of the Logan murder and sentenced to 300 years in state prison. On May 15, 2010, Ailman died from lung cancer at Hill Correctional Center in Galesburg, Illinois. Pat Marcy was indicted on one count of conspiracy under RICO, 6 counts of bribery, and 6 counts of extortion. But Marcy died during the trial. Pat Marcy was the boss of the 7th Outfit family. When the family was dismantled by the feds, it truly was the end of the outfit's political, judicial, and law enforcement stranglehold that had been at the mercy of the outfit for nearly 3/4 of a century. And it was the end of the outfit as it was known for decades. At the turn of the century, in 1903, my great-grandparents came to the United States through Ellis Island. My great-grandfather, Martin Maggio, and my great-grandmother, Margherita de Prima, were from Sambuca, Sicily. In 1909, my grandparents were married in Kansas City, Missouri. Prior to their marriage, they settled in the Bridgeport neighborhood on the south side of Chicago. They had 7 children, 2 girls and 5 boys: Elizabeth, Ben, Mary, Joe, my grandfather, Marty, Tony, and Frank. When World War II broke out, 3 of the 5 brothers went off to war. Frank and Marty joined the Navy, and Tony the Army, and after 4 years of war, they all returned safely. In 1932, my grandfather, Joe Maggio, attended school at Chicago's Art Institute. In 1934, he graduated, and that day the teachers told him, "There is no more we can teach you here. You have great talent and need to expand on it, and go to Europe and study." His response, "I don't even have bus fare to make it here every day." And this statement ended that conversation. In the late 1930s, my grandfather met my grandmother, Angie Spagnola, and they were married in March of 1941. They had 3 children: Victor, Margaret, and Carol. My father, Victor Maggio, met Janice Zempic in the early 1960s, and they were married in December of 1963. They had 3 children: Michelle, Victor, and Joseph. The Maggio family has lived in the Bridgeport neighborhood for nearly 100 years. In the mid-1960s, Sam Giancana was boss, and at the height of his power. And Frank Skid Caruso was capo of the Chinatown crew. His reign was coming to an end due to age and health. Around this time, I was born in the Bridgeport neighborhood and lived a block and a half away from the first Italian-American club. It was located next door to Riccobeni's. My earliest memories were going to the club with my father and watching the guys play cards. And the smell of cigar and cigarette smoke was always thick in the air. I used to play at the park kitty corner from the club. We liked to go there and run through the sprinklers and watch the gangsters come and go from the club. I attended school at St. Jerome. It was kitty corner from my house. I only attended the first grade there. After the first grade ended, we moved. In 1959, my dad's best friend, Matt Gilberto, moved out of the neighborhood to the suburb of Oak Lawn. He lived in Chinatown above the bowling alley. He had 2 daughters at the time, and later had another daughter and a son, Eddie. He bought a nice home, and it was clear he didn't want to raise his kids in the city. At the time, the suburbs offered so much more. 10 years later, my father followed Matt to Oak Lawn, and he had a new house built, but it was my mother that wanted us out of the neighborhood. She did not want us raised there, and my father knew she was right, so we moved out of the neighborhood. By the early 1970s, I was around 6 or 7 years old, and I started going with my dad to the neighborhood more often. He would get me up at the crack of dawn, and we were on our way to the neighborhood, and went either to KK's in Chinatown or David's on Halsted Street, but we liked KK's the best. They were the only place that had Chinese-style scrambled eggs and ham on rice, and fresh squeezed orange juice. KK's was always full of outfit guys and associates. There were bookmakers, handicappers, all doing business right in the restaurant. After breakfast at KK's, we would go to the club and stop in and visit. In the early 1970s, the original club had closed, and a new one opened on the corner of 26th Street, 3 doors down from the old club. This club was full of outfit members and made guys and associates. It became the headquarters of the 26th Street Chinatown crew. While my dad made his rounds in the club with the guys, he sometimes stopped to play a couple of hands of cards while waiting for the racetrack to open. While they played cards, I would sometimes light their cigars because I loved the smell of stick matches, and would sometimes find an abandoned pack of smokes and would sneak a smoke out behind the club. And sometimes I would run errands for the guys. Occasionally they would send me to my favorite place, Impularia Bakery, for coffee cake and bear claws. I would walk blocks to the bakery with a $100 bill in my pocket and would buy as much as I could carry and return to the club. They used to tip me for running, and hours later I would spend some on hot dogs and pop at the track and bet the rest on the horses. This was the best of times for a kid my age. There was no better street education to be had anywhere. The club was a university of sorts, and over those years I watched, listened, and learned, and always kept my mouth shut about what I heard and saw. During this time, Turk Torello, a very vicious man, took the reins and became the boss of the 26th Street Chinatown crew. After about 3 or 4 hours at the club, we would head out to one of 4 racetracks: Hawthorne, Sportsman, Arlington, or at night, sometimes Maywood Park. I made my first bet when I was 7 years old. The track at that time was loaded with gangsters from all of the 6 families from across the city. The track back then really was a who's who of the Chicago outfit. I loved going to the racetrack because I loved going to the stables by the horses, and the other fathers would bring their sons with them too. And we would run wild like we owned the joint, and nobody ever said a word. My father, Victor Maggio's street name was Vic the Stick, and they called me Stick Jr. My father was well respected in the neighborhood. He was a truck driver and a racetrack teller for over 30 years. My father was very good looking and was a very charismatic man with a great sense of humor. But he had a deep flaw. He was unpredictable and had one hell of a bad temper. He was what I would describe as being similar to a light switch on the wall. He could go off as quick as the flick of a switch. This is what he had in common with a lot of the guys in the neighborhood. And believe me when I tell you, there were a lot of light switch guys in the outfit. By the time I was 7 years old, I started spending summers with my grandparents and started working with my grandfather, Joe Maggio. He was a carpenter, but was actually a master and an artist. And he was the carpenter to the outfit. And over an 8-year period, I worked with him in many homes of the outfit members. 2 were capos of the Chinatown crew, and 1 would become capo 25 years later. And many others were made guys, and some were associates. This is when I met their wives, their kids, and seen how they lived. Over the years, a lot of outfit guys started saying hi to me everywhere I went in Bridgeport. And the only reason they even knew who I was because of my father and grandfather's reputations. By the time I was 10 years old, I knew I wanted to be a gangster because they were everywhere and were basically the only role models in the neighborhood at the time. Had these men all been doctors, I would have been a doctor. And the influence they had on the young men in the neighborhood at the time was total. In the mid-1970s, Fiore Fifi Buccieri, the head of the outfit enforcement, died, and James Vincent Turk Torello became the outfit's chief enforcer. And shortly after Torello became the boss of the 26th Street Chinatown crew, Angelo the Hook LaPetria became his underboss. A couple of years later, in 1979, Torello died of cancer, and Angelo took over the reins and was now the new boss of the 26th Street crew. In this famous picture called The Last Supper is Tony Accardo and crew boss Turk Torello and others. Torello would die of cancer a couple of years after this photo was taken. Torello was the third 26th Street crew boss. The first 26th Street boss was assigned by Al Capone. His name, Bruno Rodi Sr., known as Bruno the Bomber. The second was Bruno's son-in-law, Frank Skid Caruso. In 1979, the fourth boss became Angelo the Hook LaPetria. And sitting at this table is Joey Aiupa. He was acting boss at the time. Rush Street crew capo Dominic DeBella was dying of cancer. And to his right, his underboss, Vincent Solano. Upon DeBella's death, he would become capo of the Rush Street crew. Chicago Heights capo, Al Pilato. Underboss, Jackie Cerrone. Grand Avenue crew capo, Joey Lombardo. 26th Street Chinatown crew capo, Turk Torello. Northside capo, Joe DeVarco. And suburban capo, Joseph Black Joe Amato. And boss of bosses, Tony Accardo. By the late 1970s, I was around 14 years old, and my dad would take me to the annual Italian-American Club party under the Expressway Viaduct next to the club. And this was where all the outfit guys would come together for the big party. They always raffled off a car from Joe Rizza, and it was a good time, and they always had great food. The only other time the group would come together was at club meetings or funerals. Every funeral I ever attended in the neighborhood with my dad, there were always a lot of outfit guys in attendance, paying their respects. There are two stories related to the club that have stuck with me into my old age. When I was around 7 years old, I always heard the term the G, and it was always used in the club. And I just wondered to myself, what the hell is the G? And I would soon find out. One day we went to the club, and my dad ran in, and I stayed out by the car talking with the other kids. And there were a couple of guys standing out in front of the club. They called the kids over and pointed down the street and said, "Go ask the G if they need anything." And the kids ran down by the car and went up to the window and asked if they needed anything. The guys on the corner that sent the kids were laughing really hard, and the G drove off. And that day, I found out the G was the FBI. And I also found out from my dad, the chief rival of the outfit wasn't the local cops, it was the FBI. The term the G comes from G-men, minus the men. And the second story is from the last club party I attended under the viaduct. I was standing at the entrance by the Hungry Hound with one of the top outfit bookies' son. We were both about 15 years old at the time, and the boss, Angelo the Hook LaPetria, showed up with Shorty Lamontia. And as they walked up, he looked at Angelo and said, "One day I'm going to be the boss, and you're going to work for me." And he had a big smile on his face. Angelo turned at him with the meanest eyes I have ever seen in a light switch guy. If looks could kill, he would have been dead where he stood. The look of his eyes sent chills up my spine. But the kid wasn't smart enough to realize what was happening. He was just standing there smiling. And I was looking at Angelo, and Angelo was looking at him. Angelo grunted and walked away. Angelo truly was a very scary man, and was what nightmares are made out of. Angelo earned the name The Hook because he used to hang people from meat hooks and torture them to death. And after this encounter, I didn't feel the need to go to the club with my dad anymore. A couple of years later, I would experience firsthand the harsh reality of what the outfit really represented. As a kid, I always seen the docile side of the outfit guys in the club, and never saw the business side of the outfit, and that would soon change. Since I was a very young boy, the men of the outfit were a big influence in molding my future, and not for the better. And one day I realized my error, and then suddenly changed course. By the early 1980s, I was back living in the neighborhood and was in need of a job and a car. My dad gave me a choice between going back to school and having a good life or go to work for Marina Cartage and have a hard life. Unfortunately, I chose the hard life. Just before I started at Marina, my dad bought a car from Frank Toots Caruso and sold it to me. It was a 73 Nova, an unassuming type car. You would have never known that it was a rocket. But under the hood, it had a 350 Olds rocket with a 4-barrel Holly, and it had built suspension. This car was designed to outrun cops, clearly. But the car was used to pick up bookmaking money around the city. And I was told the car was built by James DeForty. DeForty did a lot of work for the outfit guys on their cars, and he also was an outfit hitman. That was my second car. Months later, I blew the engine racing it in West Chicago. I was hired at Marina around the time of the bombing by outfit boss Angelo LaPetria's 26th Street crew. The bombing was due to produce route bids being undercut by companies like Marina, and some were also not paying the outfit their cut. I started out fueling trucks and shuttling trucks for the mechanics, and soon moved up to running the shop and the yard. Mike gave me a lot of authority for such a young guy. My dad also worked there for about 14 years, and about 5 years later, my younger brother Joe came to work there as a lease driver to the city. Mike was not a made guy, but was clearly affiliated with the outfit at the time. One might say he was a businessman that hired and loved being around the criminal element. And a couple of felonies on a guy's record guaranteed him a job at Marina. In the early days, Marina hired quite a few criminals. When I was hired, there was one convicted murderer that I knew of working there. Also, there were 2 members of Ronnie Jarrett's infamous grocery store safe robbing crew, but not everyone that worked there was a criminal. It was at Marina that I was introduced to a driver named Lightning. He was a black gangster and had just been released from Terre Haute Federal Prison after a 13-year stretch for murder. Before he went to prison, he was a Fluky Stokes associate. He took me under his wing and introduced me to many black gangsters. For a couple of years, I played in Lightning's high-stakes weekend card games in Inglewood. Guys came and went from all over the neighborhood to play in this game. In my early years at Marina, I was a fly on the wall, that listened and learned, and was privy to most of what was going on there at the time. And believe me when I tell you, there was a lot going on. The hired truck scandal was operating at this time, and the scam included a couple of other mobbed-up trucking companies too. And all the city contracts were controlled and distributed by the seventh family. When I started with Marina, they were on Western Boulevard, and they had about 30 trucks. And 2 years later, we moved to 26th in California. And after a couple of years there, the number of trucks climbed to 100. When the Family Secrets trial was playing out in 2007, some things were clarified for me after 25 years. According to government informant Nick Calabrese, in the early 1980s, 26th Street crew capo Angelo LaPetria decided to wage an extortion war on the businessmen across the Chicagoland area. Frank and Nick Calabrese and James DeForty bombed Marina Cartage. Not once, but twice. The first bomb was a dud. Capo Angelo LaPetria, outfit hitter James DeForty, and trucking boss Fred Barbara bombed Horwath's restaurant in Elmwood Park. Frank and Nick Calabrese, along with wheelman John Feccarata, bombed Tom's Steakhouse in Melrose Park. Frank and Nick Calabrese, John Feccarata, and James DeForty bombed the Drury Lane Theater. The bombing took place just before the grand opening. What I found to be very interesting is accused bomber Fred Barbara was a passenger in Mike's Bronco when outfit thugs ran him off the road and then beat him severely and crushed his Rolex. It is pretty clear he set Mike up and then became Mike's friend and business partner after the beating and the bombings. Some friend, huh? According to Nick Calabrese, Freddie was connected to the crew that bombed Marina and other businesses across the Chicagoland area. Barbara was part of one of the bombing crews sent out by Angelo to bomb Horwath's restaurant. Nick never seen Barbara participate in the actual bombing, but told the feds he was there during the planning phase, and then left with the Horwath's bombing crew. Calabrese told jurors how the outfit would use bombings to intimidate and extort businesses. Damn near every one of these guys my father and grandfather knew, and some were their friends. And over the years, I met a lot of these guys at the club and around the neighborhood. In the mid-1980s, Frank Calabrese seen me walking into the club. I had pulled up right at the front doors in the Marina pickup truck, jumped out to drop something off for my dad. Frank Calabrese said to me, "Hey, Stick, how's that effing Moji doing over there?" Talking about Mike from Marina. I looked at him and said, "He's as crazy as ever." They looked at each other and had these sinister type smirks on their faces. When it happened, I thought what I said about Mike is what made them smirk. But after the Family Secrets trial, 20 plus years later, it hit me. I thought back to that conversation, and it became crystal clear. They were smirking because they were the bombers and strong-arm guys that muscled Mike from Marina, and nobody outside the outfit's circle knew this. The end result of the outfit bombing of Marina was resolved in the outfit's favor when the envelopes of cash started to roll from the currency exchange to Angelo. And mysteriously after this, the city contracts started to roll in, and many new trucks were bought to keep up with the streets and sanitation and water department contracts. In the mid-1980s, millions in city garbage contracts were awarded to Marina Cartage and Barber Trucking. Fred Barber was the CEO of Barber Trucking. Mike and him partnered up in the garbage business and purchased garbage trailers together, and periodically they would share parts between the companies to keep the trailers rolling. One day I went to Barber Trucking on Damon to borrow a hydraulic cylinder for one of the Yankee trailers. and Freddie came out and seemed pissed off. He then started yelling at me about parts that were not returned. Well, I personally returned them parts days before. As I argued the point, he pulled out a pistol, stuck it directly in my face, cocked it, and threatened to blow my head off, and held it there long enough that I could see the bullets in the cylinder. At first I was scared, but that quickly changed, and anger and rage set in. I left that shop with the intent of going back there to see him. When I got back to Marina, I told Mike what he did. He didn't seem to care, because Freddie was his business partner and was the direct link to the Seventh Family that was controlling and authorizing who received these city contracts. I told Mike I was going to get that little shit. And I was told by him, if you do anything to him, it'll be the last thing you ever do. And the reason why was because Freddie was a made guy. Being made gave guys like Freddie a license to mess with whoever they wanted to, whenever they wanted to, with no consequences. Fred Barber is the grandson of the first 26th Street Chinatown crew boss, Bruno the Bomber Rohde, and is also the nephew of Alderman Fred Rohde, second in command of the Seventh Family. Barber was about 5'3" and 130 pounds, and always had a lot to prove, due to his size. On multiple occasions I seen him playing the big man, waving the gun around, threatening people. What he did to me that day was for absolutely no reason. And this did not sit well with me. Right after this incident, and other incidents before this, it started to open my eyes to the true reality of guys like this. The writing on the wall was clear after the Freddie incident was brushed under the rug. I quickly learned there was no loyalty amongst these guys. Their only loyalty was to fear and the dollar, and these two guys were not stand-up guys they pretended to be, that's for sure. In the beginning, Mike was a very charismatic man with a great sense of humor. He was interested in the people that worked for him. It was a much tighter organization, but the richer he became, the harder he was to deal with. He became abusive, unappreciative, and basically unhinged at times. He lost touch with the guys that helped make him millions. And that was that. From that day forward, the old days were just that, ancient history. After spending 14 hours a day working there, I knew a hell of a lot of things. And I knew who most of the players were involved in stealing millions from the city of Chicago. And there was so much more that went on there, and I had no intention of talking about what took place there over the years. And I kept my mouth shut and moved on. By the late 1980s, I was free from the prison called Marina Cartage. My old criminal case was resolved. I left Chicago and relocated to the south suburbs, and started a new life away from these sociopaths. I left the Bridgeport neighborhood for a variety of reasons, but the main reason was the outfit structure that was in place there. See, by the time I was in my mid-20s, I didn't want to join the outfit or really have any part of them, because of what I seen and heard over the years. I was a guy that didn't want to take orders, and I didn't want to be told what I could and could not do, or be told to kill one of my friends or somebody I didn't know for a reason I didn't know. So when I came out to the suburbs, I set up my own thing, had a couple of new friends, and we got involved in some of the small rackets and did that for about 12 years. Right under the nose of the outfit, just operated away. And then I got in the bar business. And then I started putting in a lot of plays for me and the guys. I had access to several bars, all their employees and customers. So I started putting in a lot of plays with this individual. And this individual called me and said, let's have a meeting. So I went and met with him, and there was another guy with him. He was connected to the Cicero crew. Together they made me an offer to run my own shop. Now, I knew these guys, and they were pretty much business, and they weren't about violence per se. And I figured I would do it only under one condition, that they let me run my shop my way. And they told me, sure, we can do that, but you need to take full responsibility for all of your guys. You need to take care of your weekly obligations, and no cops. No cops. I had to figure out how to do this. So I came up with an idea, and my idea was to limit the guys that played through me. You see, I don't want to hurt them. And I don't want guys betting with money they didn't have, because it protected me from them and them from me. And if a guy happened to fall behind or couldn't pay what he had to, he'd go on the payment plan. And I didn't believe in kicking a guy when he was down, so I never charged any of my guys juice. None of them. No juice. And this formula worked. It worked well. It kept me going for a long time. When my father found out that I was involved with the guys from Cicero, he called me up. He wanted to talk to me, so I went over there to talk to him. And the first thing out of his mouth was, what are you doing over there? I said, over where, Dad? He said, with the guys in Cicero. And I said, I'm making money with them. He said, why didn't you come to me? I could have set you up with one of the guys in the neighborhood. I didn't want that, because I knew the guys in the neighborhood. I didn't tell him that. But I said, no, Dad, I don't want you involved, so I decided to do this on my own. He said, if something happens to you over there, you know I'm not going to be able to help you. And I said, yeah, I know. He said, if something were to happen here, I could help you. Meaning, in the Chinatown crew. He knew what all this entailed. He didn't want it for me in the end. He knew where it could end up. And he was just looking out for me. But we didn't talk for 2 years after that. After 7 years of bookmaking, I'd had enough. 20 plus years of being involved in the rackets. I had a dozen guys that worked with me. And due to a personal tragedy and seeing the writing on the wall, I knew my luck was running out. I turned my back on all of it. And I started Nagio News.
A couple of months ago, that was in fact accurate.
Became a journalist. Nagio News covered all the radical groups and riots across the country. And then, after about 2-3 years, I started Bloody Chicago. And the people close to me thought I lost my mind. They couldn't figure out why I was doing what I was doing. I didn't tell him why. And I ended up going directly from the frying pan into the fire. I put my past life behind me and started to roam the bloody streets of Chicago day and night for 7 years. My previous life experiences did not prepare me like I thought they would for the sad journey through the valley of death. Watching the deaths of so many literally shocked the conscience. On November 11th, 1998, my grandfather, Joe Maggio, died. His talent and our family's link to the old guard, his clients, died with him that day. And many outfit guys came to pay their respects to Joe the Carpenter Maggio. He lived through the Capone, Nitty, Rica, Accardo, and the Giancana years. In 2016, my father, Vic the Stick Maggio, died. He was a member of the Old Neighborhood Italian-American Club for over 50 years. And his connection to the modern outfit guys died with him that day. A lot of connected guys came to pay their respects to Vic the Stick. And this was the last time I saw any of the outfit guys again. My father lived through the Accardo, Giancana, El Doricio, Battaglia, and Iupa years. And I am the last member in my family with outfit history. And when I die, all of that history of ours dies with me. The final chapter is a story about two hitmen that went down two different paths. One of them ultimately sealed the fate of the remaining leadership of the Chicago outfit. And then there's the rise of the new political Chicago mob and their massive expansion of the old outfit rackets that were once categorized as illegal and criminal.